All right, so get this. Today, we're diving into Nostradamus. Like his prophecies and stuff.
Ooh, Nostradamus, always a good time.
Specifically, we're checking out this History Channel documentary, Nostradamus Effect, The Three Antichrists Exposed.
Okay.
You wanted to know more about this whole three Antichrists thing.
I did, yeah. It's so interesting.
It is, right? Like this 16th century French guy predicting three Antichrists throughout history. Pretty wild.
It's wild. And they get into it with his prophecies, written in these, what are they called, quatrains.
Yeah, quatrains.
Super cryptic, 4-line verses. They're all collected in this book called Centuries, and they're notoriously vague, open to a lot of interpretation.
Okay, but before we get into Nostradamus and his predictions, can we just, take a step back for a sec?
Sure.
What exactly is an Antichrist? I feel like I've heard the term, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details.
Yeah, no, for sure. So the Antichrist, it primarily comes from the New Testament.
Yeah.
Specifically, the book of Revelation. And it describes this, deceptive figure, right? Appears as a savior, but then, bam, ultimate destruction. End times.
Heavy stuff.
But here's the thing. This whole concept, it isn't just a Christian thing.
Oh, really? I didn't know that. Tell me more.
Islam actually has a similar figure.
Okay.
It's called the Masih ad-Dajjal.
Masih ad-Dajjal.
Yeah, and like the Antichrist, he deceives and leads people astray. So this idea, right, this archetype of a false prophet or like a fake messiah, it's not just one religion.
Oh.
It really seems to resonate across cultures, different religions.
It's creepy, but I totally get why people are fascinated by it.
Right.
Why do you think this idea of the Antichrist is so, enduring? That it pops up in so many different places?
I think it comes down to, we as humans, we want to understand the world.
Yeah.
Especially when things are chaotic or, uncertain. And the Antichrist, this figure, it gives us someone to blame,
Right, it's not just random bad stuff. There's this, evil mastermind behind it all.
Exactly. It's not just random bad stuff. It's this guy, the Antichrist.
Right. Okay, so back to Nostradamus. He predicted 3 Antichrists. Not just one. Did he think they were going to team up or something?
That's the thing that makes Nostradamus so different, so unique.
Okay.
He believed they would appear one after the other.
Oh, wow.
Each one, building on the destruction from the one before.
Yeah.
And then ultimately, bam, apocalypse.
Ooh, terrifying. Okay, so let's talk about this whole Nostradamus effect. I think the documentary mentions it.
Yeah.
I've heard about this, people finding connections between his prophecies and, what's happening today.
Right. So the theory goes that these prophecies, like Nostradamus's, they somehow, intersect with modern events.
Okay.
Almost like it's, predetermined or something.
Yeah.
It begs the question, did this guy actually see glimpses of the future? Or are we, really good at connecting dots that actually don't exist?
That's a good question. Okay, so the documentary says that Nostradamus' first Antichrist was Napoleon Bonaparte. How did they even come up with that? What did Napoleon even do that was so Antichristy?
Well, he did wage war across Europe.
True.
Millions of deaths.
Yeah, that's pretty bad.
But there are these Nostradamus scholars, and they point to a few quatrains.
Okay.
And they think these quatrains back up this whole Napoleon claim.
Okay, I'm listening.
One of the most compelling ones, it seems to spell out Napoleon's name.
Wait, what?
Yeah, using the first letters of 3 French towns.
Yeah.
Pau, Ney, and Oloron.
No way. His name is literally in the prophecy.
It's crazy, right?
That's wild. Seems a little too perfect.
I know. It's these little linguistic puzzles that make Nostradamus so interesting. But there are other quatrains too. There's one that mentions an emperor born near Italy.
Okay.
And he, leads his empire to ruin. Sound familiar?
Well, Napoleon was born on Corsica, right?
Uh-huh.
Which is an island right next to Italy. Right.
And his empire did crumble after that whole Russia thing.
Exactly. And then there's this quatrain that warns a pope about a threat from a city with 2 rivers. Scholars think this is about Napoleon imprisoning Pope Pius VI.
Okay.
In Valence, a city with, you guessed it, 2 rivers.
That's wild. So many coincidences. And the documentary, it mentions that Napoleon was pretty brutal, right?
Oh, yeah. Brutal conqueror, for sure.
How many people?
His conquests, something like 3.5 million deaths.
That's a lot.
Staggering number. Definitely fits the whole destructive Antichrist image.
Okay, wait, hold on. There's one more thing I got to mention.
What's that?
Apparently, Napoleon carried a collection of Nostradamus's prophecies with him.
Get out.
I know, right? although they turned out to be fakes.
Oh.
But still, I mean, even if they weren't real, he knew about Nostradamus, right? Maybe he thought he was fulfilling the prophecies.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Even if they were fake, maybe he thought he was meant to play this role. The Antichrist, even if it meant destruction. So what do you think? Is there actually something to all these connections? Or is it just like pure coincidence?
It's easy to see these quatrains, as straight-up predictions. But Nostradamus' language, it's so symbolic, open to so many interpretations.
Right.
So we might just be finding patterns where there aren't any.
So basically it's up to us to decide if we believe in this whole Napoleon connection, right?
Yeah, I think so. Some people see this and think, aha, Nostradamus was right, and others are like, nah, just random stuff happening. That's part of what keeps Nostradamus so interesting.
All right, moving on to Antichrist number 2. I'm guessing this is where Hitler comes in.
Yep, you got it.
Okay.
And the documentary, it makes a really good case that a bunch of Nostradamus' quatrains line up with Hitler.
Okay.
Like, there's this one, it describes a figure from Western Europe, seduces the masses with his tongue.
Ooh, that's a creepy way to describe Hitler's rise to power. But, I mean, his speeches, everyone knows they were powerful. Like, he knew how to manipulate people.
Exactly. And there's more. Nostradamus talks about this guy named Hister.
Hister.
Yeah. A lot of people think it's just Hitler misspelled.
Okay. That seems like a bit of a stretch, but okay.
I know, right. But what's interesting is these Hister quatrains, they mention the Danube River a lot.
Okay.
And that was close to where Hitler was born, in Austria.
Ooh, that's a little creepy. So, like, Nostradamus geographically pinpointed Hitler's origin?
Maybe. And there's even more quatrains that seem to connect to Hitler.
Like what?
One predicts that the second Antichrist, he'll become famous in the East.
Okay.
Maybe referring to, like, Hitler's alliance with Japan during World War II. Another one describes this beast ferocious with hunger, crossing rivers.
Ooh.
Could be, tanks, other military stuff that Hitler used.
Okay, this is starting to feel like a lot of coincidences are adding up.
Right. And then there's this one that talks about a cage of iron. Some people think that means Hitler's bunker.
The bunker where he spent his last days?
Yep. Taken together, all these quatrains, I mean, they paint a pretty disturbing picture. Ruthless, hungry for power, and then a bad ending.
Wow. So it sounds like this documentary makes a pretty strong argument for Hitler being the second Antichrist. But what about Hitler himself? Did H.E. buy into any of this?
Well, there is some evidence that Hitler was into, like, occult stuff.
Okay.
So he may have known about Nostradamus' prophecies.
Oh, and didn't he visit Napoleon's tomb after he conquered France?
Yes. So maybe he saw a link between himself and Napoleon. Like, he was meant to follow in his footsteps.
Wow, so maybe he thought he was destined to be this, like, Antichrist figure.
It's possible. And then there's that quote from Hitler. He said, "I follow my path with the complete confidence and certainty of a sleepwalker."
Ooh, that's creepy. Like he was being controlled by something.
Right. So, based on all this, did Nostradamus actually predict Hitler? Or are we just looking back and connecting the dots?
Good question.
It's tough to say for sure. Like, did Nostradamus really see all this coming? Or is it us just making sense of it after it happened? It's really hard to tell.
But the similarities between, the prophecies and what Hitler did, it's hard to just ignore them.
Right. It's definitely unsettling. And the documentary, it doesn't stop there.
Oh.
It goes on to explore the third Antichrist.
Okay, now this is where it gets interesting.
Right.
The documentary says this third Antichrist, he's the most dangerous and he's either alive right now or is going to show up soon.
Chills.
And the quatrains about this third Antichrist, they're even more cryptic than the others.
Yeah, so much more cryptic. It leads to all sorts of crazy theories about who it could be.
I bet. Okay, so let's say that for the next part of our deep dive. You guys definitely don't want to miss this.
Welcome back.
All right, so before we jump into all these theories about who this third Antichrist could be,
Yeah.
remember that quatrain we talked about earlier? The one about like a 27-year war, and then the third Antichrist is annihilated.
Right.
That one really got me thinking, like, what if this big, bad, evil guy, what if he already did his thing, like messed up the world and then just died?
It definitely makes you rethink the whole thing.
Yeah. Like, what if we didn't even notice?
Exactly. It adds like another layer to all this prophecy stuff. Makes it even harder to figure out.
Okay, so the documentary, it goes into some pretty out there interpretations, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's this one quatrain that mentions a guy named Mappus.
Mabos, yeah.
And some Nostradamus fans, they think Mappus could be the third Antichrist's name.
Right.
And I'm guessing they've tried to connect that name to some real people.
Oh, they definitely have.
Like who?
Well, get this. They've even linked Mabus to a couple of U.S. presidents.
Wait, what? U.S. presidents? Which ones?
George W. Bush and Barack Obama.
Hold up, Mappus and Bush or Obama? How did they even get there?
It's some pretty intense code breaking. Like, for George W. Bush, they say if you reverse the go in his name, you get Am, and then you combine that with Bush, so you get Ambush, then you shorten that to Mabus.
Whoa, that is reaching.
Right. But the documentary, it doesn't seem to buy into any of that.
Yeah, I mean, it does seem a bit far-fetched.
It basically argues that neither Bush nor Obama fit the description of the third Antichrist that Nostradamus gives.
Right, like mass destruction and all that.
Right. He predicted someone who would cause way more violence and destruction.
Yeah.
Someone who just like turns the world upside down.
Yeah, okay, I see their point. It seems like there's so much room for like different interpretations with these prophecies and maybe even some bias too.
Absolutely. What one person sees as a clear sign, someone else might think it's just random.
Totally. So if we forget about specific people for a minute, what are some of the bigger ideas from Nostradamus's predictions, especially about this third Antichrist?
Well, one of the big ones is that the world's going to get more and more unstable before the third Antichrist shows up. Nostradamus predicted wars, famines, plagues, even natural disasters, like all signs that things are about to get really bad.
That's kind of scary considering what's going on in the world right now.
Right.
Climate change, political stuff, pandemics.
Yeah, it does feel like things are getting shaky.
Yeah, totally. And that's where that whole Nostradamus effect comes back in, right? Like his prophecies, they feel relevant to our anxieties today. Makes you wonder if we're repeating history.
Yeah, it's like he's holding up this mirror to our time, showing us our fears about the future.
Right. But does that mean we're, like, destined to make the same mistakes as before? Or can we, like, break free from all that?
That's the question, isn't it? I mean, Nostradamus can be pretty negative.
Yeah.
But I think he was giving us warnings, not, like, telling us exactly what's going to happen.
So he was trying to warn us so we could, like, try to avoid those things.
Exactly. It's not about just accepting whatever's going to happen. It's about trying to change things.
Yeah.
Being proactive, taking responsibility.
Right. So not just saying, oh, well, Nostradamus said it, so it's going to happen anyway. That's a much more hopeful way to think about it. So instead of focusing on who this third Antichrist might be, maybe we should be thinking about how to make the world a better place.
Absolutely.
Like actually do something.
Yeah, make a difference. So instead of getting all hung up on the specifics, I think it's more helpful to focus on like creating a more peaceful, more just world.
Right. Makes sense. But the documentary also gets into some like deeper stuff, right? Like psychological and spiritual things about the Antichrist.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It touches on this idea that the Antichrist can represent our shadow selves, like the darker parts of us that we don't want to face.
So the Antichrist is like the potential for evil that we all have inside us.
Exactly. And by like acknowledging that darkness within ourselves, maybe we can start to heal the stuff that leads to conflict and division in the world.
Wow, that's deep. So it's not just about fighting some external enemy. It's also about dealing with the darkness inside each of us.
Exactly. Maybe the real test is not about conquering someone else, but about facing and changing ourselves.
I like that. So it's about choosing compassion, over just not caring and working to make the world a better place, regardless of whether some Antichrist shows up or not.
Right, exactly.
And that kind of brings us back to what we were talking about before. How do we prepare for the future, especially if this third Antichrist is still out there?
Yeah.
Maybe the best way to prepare is to focus on like becoming more compassionate and aware.
And taking action, right?
Yeah. So instead of being scared of the future, we should focus on making a future worth fighting for.
I love that.
But the documentary also suggests that this third Antichrist, like his arrival is inevitable. Like it's all part of some big plan we can't control.
Right. There is that sense of like it's all going to happen anyway in some interpretations of prophecy.
Yeah.
But I think we should remember that prophecy, it's not always about telling the future for sure.
Yeah, okay.
It's more about like giving warnings and guidance.
So it's not about just sitting back and waiting for something bad to happen, but more about doing something about it.
Exactly. It's about taking responsibility, realizing that we can make choices that can change things.
I really like that interpretation. It makes prophecy less scary and more, I don't know, empowering.
I think so too.
Yeah.
And that's a good way to think about it, especially
Yeah.
now with all the crazy stuff going on in the world.
So it's not just about predicting the future, but giving us tools to create a better one.
Exactly.
Okay, I like that. What are some things we can do, like practically, to, pay attention to Nostradamus's warnings and move toward a better future?
That's a great question. I think we all need to figure out our own ways to do that.
Yeah.
But some important things are like becoming more aware of what's happening, being empathetic to others, and doing something to help.
Okay.
We need to know what challenges we face, locally and globally.
Right.
We need to care about people who are struggling, whether they're close to us or far away. And we need to actually do something to fix the problems, like fighting for social justice, protecting the environment, or even just being kind to each other.
Those are all really good ideas. It's like remembering that we're all connected and that our actions can affect other people.
Exactly. And I think that's a message that's often hidden in prophecy. The idea that what we do matters, that we can influence what happens, and that even when things seem really bad, we can still choose to make a better future.
I like that a lot. It's like we're not just watching history happen, we're part of making it.
Right. And that's a powerful thing to remember as we keep exploring Nostradamus and what his prophecies mean for us today.
Speaking of what they mean for us, there's one thing from the documentary that I found really interesting. The idea that Nostradamus's prophecies, even though they seem focused on all this bad stuff, they could also be seen as like warnings to help us avoid those things.
Yes. The documentary definitely looks at it that way.
Right.
Like maybe Nostradamus wasn't just trying to say, this is what's going to happen, but more like, hey, watch out for this so you can try to stop it.
So it's not about passively accepting some predetermined future, but rather about actively engaging with the challenges we face and trying to create a more positive outcome.
Exactly.
I love that interpretation. It's like turning prophecy from a source of fear into a source of empowerment.
I love that, yeah. And I think that's an important thing to remember as we try to understand our world and deal with all the uncertainties ahead.
Well, I think we've covered a lot in this deep dive. We've looked at where the whole Antichrist idea comes from, gone deep into Nostradamus's predictions of 3 Antichrists, talked about the connections to Napoleon and Hitler, and tried to figure out who this 3rd Antichrist could be.
And we've also discussed those bigger themes and patterns in Nostradamus' prophecies, like the idea of the world becoming more unstable, paying attention to warnings, and how prophecy can make us want to take action instead of just being afraid.
It's been a really interesting journey, full of mystery, intrigue, and some pretty deep thinking. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you, our listener, with something to think about.
Oh, I'm always up for more thinking.
What if we assume that this 3rd Antichrist is still out there? How do we even prepare for something like that? Can we prepare for something so mysterious and unclear? Or is the very act of preparing, of becoming aware of the potential dangers and taking steps to mitigate them, a way of altering the course of events and potentially averting the prophesied outcome?
Those are really great questions, and they get to the core of what it means to really think about prophecy. It's not just about accepting some preordained future, but rather about actively participating in shaping that future. It's about recognizing that even when things seem impossible, we have the power to make choices that lead to a better outcome.
That's such a great point. It's like remembering that we're not just watching history happen, we're a part of making it.
Exactly. And that's an important message to remember as we deal with the challenges of our world and try to create a more just and sustainable future.
Well said. I think that's a perfect place to leave our listeners. We've explored some fascinating and sometimes scary ideas in this deep dive, but in the end, I think we've come to a message of hope and empowerment.
Yeah, the message is clear. We have the power to shape the future, even with prophecies and challenges that seem impossible. What we do today will determine the world we have tomorrow.
That's a really powerful thought, especially now with so much uncertainty. It's a reminder that we're not just along for the ride, we can actually steer the course of history.
Absolutely.
Let's move on to our final thoughts and wrap up this deep dive into Nostradamus. We're back, ready to wrap up our Nostradamus deep dive. All this talk about Antichrist, it's been pretty intense.
Yeah, it's amazing, right? Predictions from like 500 years ago, and we're still talking about them.
I know, and there's just so much to unpack, with Nostradamus, his whole writing style with those, what were they called? Quatrains?
Yeah, the quatrains. Super cryptic.
Right, and then the connections to, like, Napoleon and Hitler. It's kind of mind-blowing.
What gets me is how Nostradamus really gets at this, like
Uh-huh.
human need, right? To make sense of the world, especially when things are crazy and unpredictable.
Totally. Like his prophecies, they give us this, I don't know, this framework, even if it is mysterious, for trying to understand stuff, the past, present, even the future.
It's like he's giving us these clues to some like hidden code of the universe, you
Yeah.
know? And we're here centuries later trying to crack it.
Exactly. And just trying to figure out what those prophecies mean, trying to like untangle them. It makes you think critically. You have to look at things from different angles.
Yeah, it's a real mental workout.
It has been quite a journey, hasn't it? I mean, we've looked at historical figures, debated interpretations, and even thought about like the psychology and spiritual side of this whole Antichrist thing.
We have.
And one of the biggest things I've realized is that Nostradamus' prophecies, even though they're often seen as predicting doom and gloom, they can also be interpreted as like warnings.
Right, like signposts pointing us in a different direction.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to guide us toward a better path.
Exactly. He might have been saying, hey, look, this is what could happen, so maybe try to do things differently.
I really like that way of looking at it. It's like instead of just accepting some predetermined fate, we can actually try to shape a more positive future.
I agree. It's about empowerment. Right, recognizing that we have choices.
Exactly. And that's so important right now with all the crazy stuff happening in the world. It's like reminding ourselves that we're not just along for the ride. We can actually steer things.
Yeah, we have agency. We can make a difference.
But as we wrap this up, there's one last thing I want to throw out there. Something to think about.
Okay, I'm listening. What you got?
We've talked about this third Antichrist maybe being a person, an ideology, or even like a force of nature. But what if, and hear me out here, what if the real Antichrist is something, I don't know, more subtle, something that's already all around us?
Ooh, interesting. Like what?
What if it's like apathy, indifference, that lack of compassion that allows bad things to happen?
Whoa, that's deep. So you're saying it's not some big bad enemy out there, but something within us, within humanity.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the battle between good and evil isn't just this epic showdown, but also something that's happening inside each of us.
So the real challenge isn't defeating some external enemy, but about overcoming those negative things inside ourselves.
Right. Choosing to care, choosing to act, and building a world based on love, justice, and being kind to each other.
Powerful stuff. Maybe that's the true test. Not conquering others, but conquering those darker parts of ourselves.
That's a great point to end on, I think. We might not be able to control everything that happens, but we can choose how we react to it. We can choose hope over fear, action over apathy. We can create a world that shows the best of humanity.
Absolutely. It's been awesome exploring these prophecies with you. Thanks for coming along on this Nostradamus deep dive.
And to you, the listener, thanks for joining us. We hope this got you thinking, made you look at the world differently, and maybe even left you feeling a little more hopeful. Remember, the future isn't set in stone. It's something we build together, one choice at a time.
Keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep working towards a better world.
Until next time.